Good evening, everybody. It's Ada, Shum and David Chipchase here from Just Eat Takeaway. First of all, we'd really like to thank the Product Circle for inviting us to do our talk on when your product is data and what we've learned here at Just Eat Takeaway. And also thank you very much for everybody who is watching live tonight. And we very much welcome your questions after the presentation. So first of all, what are we going to talk about over the next 20 minutes or so? So we're going to spend a bit of time first doing some introductions, both to ourselves and to Just Eat Takeaway as a business. And then Ada's going to spend some time talking to us about, well, what is a data product? So how do we define that in the industry? And then ultimately, how do we define that at Just Eat Takeaway? And then we're going to talk a bit more specifically about some of the work we've done in the data product space and then share a case study and some learnings. So first of all, some introductions. So some of you watching tonight might be aware of Just Eat Takeaway as a business. So and also might be aware that earlier this year we also merged with a Dutch company called takeaway.com. So that merger now has gone through, and that's increased the global footprint of the combined business significantly. So now we operate within 24 countries with a really big offering, a consumer offering there in terms of the restaurants that we offer, and also an equally a big audience. So very much a large organisation now, and to our reckoning, probably the biggest takeaway food business outside of China. So a really big global footprint, but with a laser kind of local focus. So a little bit about ourselves. So introduction from me. So I'm David Chipchase. So I'm the principal product manager in data products. So I've been in the data in the product space for a number of years, and more specifically in data products at Just Eat for probably the last 2 or so years. Really passionate about how we put data at the heart of our product strategy. And then I'll hand over to Ada now to do her introduction.
Thanks, Dave. Hello, I'm Ada. I have been in Just Eat Takeaway for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was in retail, so working for Tesco, where I was doing both web and app development, and also then moving on to the transport sector. So next slide, please. If I was doing a live face-to-face meetup, the first thing I'll do is to get some audience participation. So the first question I'm going to ask you guys is, what do you think is a data product? Did you think about dashboards, reporting, spreadsheets? Or did you think about algorithms and data science? Or were you thinking about something more like Netflix, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with given lockdown? This is where they would use the information on what we watch, when we watch things, in order to suggest recommendations to get us watching even more Netflix. Now, the answer is that all of those are correct. And I was Googling, in preparation for this meeting, what is data products? And so I searched for data products, data product management, data as a service. And there's lots of really different views out there. And there's no real, I don't think, good sources of what product managers do in data yet, which is why we're here to talk and share with you what we've learned. And what I found is a really good blog by Simon O'Regan. His definition is that data products are those whose primary objective is to use data to facilitate an end goal. Right, that sounds pretty simple, right? What I'm going to do now actually is to take you outside of product and into data, because I think the data product space is a bit different to website and apps. So I know you can't see or read everything on this slide, but I just want to show you this piece of research done by the International Data Corporation, the IDC, where they interviewed 1,200 companies worldwide about what is data leadership. In fact, the focal point is, if you were a chief data officer at a company, what are the 4 areas you need to look at? Now, things on the right is the stuff that is very visible. So, for example, starting at the bottom right, analytics is what you guys see all the time. It's about providing insight to help the business make decisions. Top right is innovation. So again, very much visible in the outside world at the moment, like Netflix, is how we monetize data to grow at scale. But on the left, what I've learned since joining Just Eat Takeaway is that the governance and the operations are equally important. and you definitely can't do anything to make it less so. So moving on, I'm going to take each box one by one and explain what kind of problems you face and how does product management apply to it. Starting with the bread and butter for data. So I'm sure you've all had analysts in your business who can do SQL queries, they can go into databases, search for what they want, and produce you spreadsheets and reports and dashboards. So in Just Eat Takeaway, the typical questions these analysts get asked is, what kind of cuisines should we go after? If you imagine in Manchester, we've got 1,200 restaurants, then actually, do we need more Indian food? Do we need less Chinese? Do we have more Thai? The second question we get asked often is, if we launch a new website or an app feature, is it really driving increased conversion rates? And thirdly, how can we also reduce the cost per order so that we're more efficient? Now, the role of data here is just like what you would do for website and apps. It's about prioritizing business requests, understanding the stakeholders' needs, and you'll be amazed that across the business, everybody's got different ways of defining KPIs. For example, new customers might be customers who's not actually been with the business for 2 years, or it might be 5 years. And then lastly, I've found that actually doing user research on things like Tableau reports is a really good way to understand how people use the data, especially for those who are less data literate. Now, moving on, the second box is about operations. If you look at a diagram at the top, essentially this is about taking raw bits of data, making sure that you can clean it and curate it so that it's usable, and then building the system around it in the cloud so that it's available to our stakeholders. The problem space we work on is about how can we make the data jobs really efficient? What's the best way to build a data model that works for all markets? Or how can we ensure the data is clean and available by 6 o'clock in the morning? The role of product here is about empathizing with end users, understanding what they use the data for. Typically, we've got country or sales managers needing the data by 9 a.m. So we have to understand how they work in order to work backwards. And so this is where we agree with them and work with them to define the vision, where we want to be, and also how do we get there so that the data is reliable. And then lastly, the product role could be also about gathering requirements so that you can map data from different sources to a common model. Right, governance. So yes, there is an aspect of data which is around compliance, security, and risks. And before you start yawning, this is really crucial. If our customers don't trust that we're going to treat our data properly, are you going to register and buy things from them? And so the questions we have to answer is, have we got the right policies in place to protect customer and also restaurants in our case? What happens if we breach, and what are the risks? How do we actually manage it? And then lastly, how do we log and monitor data queries so that we know only the right people are getting what they need? The role of product here is acting as a translator between legal, information security, and engineers. And together we scope solutions to meet what could be quite fuzzy legal policies and requirements into something a bit more tangible and probably quite technical as well. We also need to define sufficient alerting and monitoring so that we can keep understanding what's going on in the business. And the last box that we've got is around innovation. This is very much the machine learning space where we try new algorithms, bring it to the front end, as you can see from the top pictures there, so that users can see it on the app, the website, emails, SMS. And that means customers or restaurants can get personalized information at their fingertips. Typical questions we have to look into are, how can we help users discover more exciting restaurants and cuisines that they love? Think about yourself being maybe a vegan or liking spicy food. It'll be great to maybe use that so that you can find other similar cuisines or restaurants you haven't tried before. And similarly, we can use this to enable more one-to-one marketing so that it's not one size fits all. And then lastly, at Just Eat Takeaway, we need to think about the scale of our data science capabilities and how do we experiment with it. And so where product managers can help is to collaborate very closely with data science and engineers to define a vision and a strategy. We need to understand the benefits and the costs in order to maybe build a platform that's right for the business to utilize all these algorithms at scale. And I'm going to hand over to Dave, who's going to give you a case study.
Thanks very much for that, Ada. Before we get on to the case study, one of the things that we wanted just to briefly share with you is how we've organised our data products teams here at Just Eat Takeaway. And we thought probably the best way to capture this was to share the vision that we've set for the department. And as Ada's touched on, this is broadly around the management of our data assets to power better outcomes for our customers, restaurants, and couriers. So, very much acknowledging the nature of the three-sided marketplace in each customer that we cater for. And when we break that down a little bit, what are the key components of this vision? A really central area of this is how do we make that data available to people who need it within the business? So, within our teams, we talk a lot about democratization of data. So how do we ensure that when people need it, it's available for them in a way that they can use it? It's also around curating that data. So, we touched on it earlier around the importance of having, the right data ingested, organizing that data in the right way when it gets to the data warehouse. So when users are accessing this data, it's available to them. And when they retrieve that data, it's in a format that they expect it to be. So really important around the curation of that data. And also, acknowledging that, business partners and analysts are really key customers of ours. So, having the data available to make, the business improved or help the business improve their decision making. And also, how do we start to bring all of those data capabilities alive so we can start to drive data innovations through the business? So yeah, just before we go into the case study, this section here really is, we thought it'd be useful just to frame, who is a typical stakeholder or customer of a data products team. So these are broadly like the main buckets of customers. There are others, but essentially the customers that we deal with do fall into these key areas. So data science, like a really important area. So as a data scientist, what I'm really interested in is having the pipelines available for me to serve my algorithms to a user in the fastest and easiest possible way, and then coupled with that, rapid experimentation framework. So in the data products team, we spend a lot of time with data scientists, understanding those requirements and how do we help them to get their algorithms in front of users. Marketing, so we'll come on to this in a second, but a really key customer of ours. So really a requirement there would be about customer segmentation and personalization. Data engineers, so another key group that we work really closely with. So as a data engineer, that's about fast deployment of code, safe testing environments within the data platform. We've touched on analysts as well, so advanced analytics tools, but I think also for analysts, it's about having those ingestion pipelines, so they're able to get the outputs of their analytics, into a storage system like the data warehouse, but then equally retrieve that as and when they need it. So really important around the self-service tools that we provide for that community. Our operations teams, this is our logistics, so our delivery network. So all of the tools and analytics capabilities, and then our front-end product team. So we've spent a lot of time over the last 2-3 years and building personalization services. So within the data team, we do have a personalization team, and they work really closely with data scientists as well to run a lot of experiments within the front end. So really optimizing the UI with those algorithms to improve the customer experience. But one of the areas we wanted to go a little bit deeper on is some work that we've been doing really for the last 2 or 3 years with our marketing colleagues. So we're going to go through a really quick case study about how we work with them to bring our data capabilities to life to power their next generation of marketing communications. So let's unpack a little bit the challenges that we were trying to solve here with marketing. So broadly, 3 areas of focus. So there was a feeling really that there was a limited on-demand data pipeline. So marketing knew that this data was available, that there was a feeling that they just couldn't access it when they needed to, in order to have more granular one-to-one communications with our users. So it goes back to that point earlier around democratization. So there was a feeling that marketing couldn't really get this data when they needed it. There was also a view that there was a limited understanding of where our users were within the life cycle, within their life cycle on the platform. So when we say life cycle here, this is an understanding of, well, is this a new user to the platform? Are they an active or regular customer? Are we noticing a slight change in behaviour of their ordering patterns that could mean that they were at risk on the platform? So it was that understanding really at a customer level of what stage they were with their life cycle on the platform, and this was to enable marketing to help to drive their metrics around retention and activation of users. And the third area here, related really to the previous two, was there was a feeling that the content was fairly generic. So, if you were user A and user B, it was quite a similar message that we were sending to those users. So there wasn't a great deal of personalization within that content. So there was a feeling that we could start to use the data to make the content of those emails more engaging. One thing that's worth noting as we go through this case study is it's so important to have those data foundations in place. So we had spent a lot of time here at Just Eat Takeaway of building that capability around the data platform. So having all of the customer data ingested, so it was contained within a data lake, and then ultimately organized within a data warehouse and accessible to people who needed it. So really, really important to have that data stored in one place. If it's appropriate for your business, one global data model, and where at all possible to link all of that customer and restaurant data together, because this platform then becomes an enabler for any of the future innovations that you want to do as a business. But it starts with the customer. And one of the challenges that we had here at Just Eat Takeaway is we had all of this information about our users, and we were ingesting into the data lake loads of events that told us a lot about the customer. But one of the things that we needed to solve in order to allow marketing to have these one-to-one communications with our users was to ensure that we had a single view of that customer. So an example of this would be that we had some users who might have duplicate accounts, and the way that we were sending those messages to users is that they could receive they would be the same user, but they could receive slightly two different messages or two different types of vouchers that we would send to them. So it was really, really important to do more foundational work here to ensure we had that one view of a customer, because that would then enable marketing to have that confidence that they were communicating to on a one-to-one basis. So we did a lot of work foundationally here with our data science colleagues to then build the algorithms where we could start to with confidence match all of those counts into a single customer view. So a really important piece of work for this stream. The second element here was actually we needed a more forensic understanding of what the customer's behaviour was and preferences on the platform. So again, really, really important part of this was the models that our data science team were building. And a key one here was around customer ontology. So this started to really show us a lot about what the user behaviour was on the platform at a customer level. So their ordering behaviour, what were their food preferences, information about demographic, the amount they were spending on the service, and their location as well. So really gold dust for marketeers. So it was a really important exercise to harness all of this information and understand how we could get that to marketing to help them achieve their objectives. And as much as that was about the customer and it was super important, we also needed to do a similar exercise to understand the restaurant part of the puzzle. So what type of restaurants food did we have on the platform? What were the attributes of those dishes? What type of ordering attributes did they have? Were they a dinner dish? Were they a lunchtime dish? What was the nature of the ingredients? Did they contain pasta? Were they certain spicy foods? And it was really important to have this and from the data science team, because then we were able to say, well, we understand the customer, but then how do we start to match cuisine to them through a recommendations engine? So having these two understandings was super important. And then what we started to do was take all of those data science models and then understand how can we start to run some rapid experiments within our marketing channels to understand the effectiveness of this. So taking the outputs of those models and then running them through recommender algorithms, and then honing those recommender algorithms through various testing, multivariate A/B testing, to then find out what that secret sauce was when we combined the ontology data with the algorithm to then get the best outcome for the user. And then we did a similar thing where we started to build the customer segmentation, so allowing us to build certain segments of users for marketing to target as well. So think about this really as, we built those models. This was now how did we start to run that rapid validation really that this stuff worked. And then the final piece here was then to bring the engineers really, really close to this. So how then did we start to think, well, actually, we've got all of the algorithmic data that we need. How do we now start to scale that so we can do this stuff, at scale and build a platform around it? So this was the bit where, we started to really, really work closely with engineers to unpick and solve this part of the puzzle. And where we ended up, we're really proud with the solution that we ended up with. So effectively, as a marketeer now, from the engineering structure that we built, every customer comms data touch point is pretty much at their fingertips. It's a single technology stack, so all of the challenges that we had at the start of the project, which was marketing just couldn't get their hands on this data. There wasn't the technology to do that. We solved that with this approach. And also what we were conscious of when we built this was that marketeers will use a CRM, so that's a customer relationship management platform. So we wanted to build this in a way where it fitted really elegantly into that CRM, but was also agnostic to it. So we built this directly on top of our data platform rather than building these services within the CRM, which felt like the right strategy, the right approach of the time. And we also established new data feedback loops. So this is a really, really good tool for data scientists, because they could constantly learn from their algorithms, because we had the feedback loops from live customer interactions. So that's really how we put the pieces together. When we were building it, one thing that we were really conscious of as well is around the scale. So we knew the volume of marketing communications that the teams were sending out. And if you look at some of the metrics there, so we've built this to handle 4,000 recommenders requests per second. So it's a very heavily used component that we had to build there, and also the ability to handle quite a lot of lift and shift of data as well around the customer attributes, and also globally, right? So to build this so it was reusable within all of our markets. So that's the solution that we ended on, of how we productionized all of the data science efforts. And that's what it looked like to the customer. So these were the new capabilities that you would see as a Just Eat Takeaway customer. So some examples there of the recommenders through the CRM channels, and then also to the right there, this is how marketing started to use that data to think about segmentation. So now we can identify a customer that's active, at risk, perhaps lapsing from the platform, and really start to do the art of the marketeer there in terms of how we start to talk to that user to get the outcomes that they needed. So that's what you would see as an end user, and also it gave marketing a much more sophisticated way to think about our customers. So let's talk about some key takeaways. So excuse the pun there. So I think one of the key things for me as a product manager working in this space is, when we talk about data product management, the skills actually are pretty similar than you would use in more traditional product management roles, if you like. The user is still at the heart of everything that you do. The user, as we've talked about today, is probably an end user because they're receiving these marketing messages, but the end user is equally as much the marketing team, because you're giving them the tools to achieve and solve the problem that you were collaborating on. And I think within data product management roles, that user could be an analyst, or it could be a data scientist, but those are still at the heart of everything that you do. I think a key thing as well is get really, really close to your engineers and your data scientists. You'll really need their expertise and technical guidance, certainly with data scientists, because it is a very, very, very unique skill that those guys bring, and also the technical background as well. So there are a lot of back ends because you're building data platforms here essentially. So there is a lot of back end integrations that you will need guidance on. And the one thing I would call out here is to ensure that you are talking to your engineers about the strategic importance of the work. If you're a data engineer working in the back end that's working on a data pipeline, sometimes they can lose sight a bit of the reasons for doing that work. So always be talking to your engineers around what the end result of this stuff is, so they can put that into context. And equally, get as close to your stakeholders. They're key within this role. Whether they're majority of those will probably be internal stakeholders. So really work with them to unpack the problem that they're trying to solve, and how you work collaboratively together to do that with data. And I think this goes back to the strategy that we spoke about is democratizing data. So really give this data at the fingertips of your end users, really empower them. If you look at the example with the case study, that was giving that data to marketing. They were the experts of the creative, the look and feel, actually, when we should be sending marketing messages, but and give them the self-service tools to empower them to do that. And also ensure that any data service that you create is stable and it's scalable. That scalable point I think is really, really important, because the data is only going to become more important to businesses, and it's only going to become a larger commodity that we have. And I think as that happens, requirements will become more complex, and the need to scale this from an engineering perspective is really important, not just for today, but actually where you want to take that capability in the future. So I think that's the end of our talk. So we thank you very much for listening, and we welcome your questions. Thank you.